Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody. We would like to welcome you to this seminar on October 4. Next slide, please, Rachel.
I don't know why it's not switching over.
Okay, then I'll just get started. We wanted to give you a little bit of background on the iWest initiative. So it still focuses on the 6 Intermountain West states. And we're currently talking to DOE on what the next path forward for iWest will look like. But we'll still be focused on energy transition in these 6 states. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start introducing the speakers for today. So today's seminar will be delivered by 2 speakers, Dr. Deborah Sunter from Department of Energy and Sonrisa Lucero, also from the Department of Energy. And I'll start with introducing Deborah Sunter, and then we're going to go to Sonrisa. So Dr. Deborah Sunter serves as the Senior Advisor of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the U.S. Department of Energy. She's on leave currently from her role as an assistant professor at Tufts University. Deborah holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and a BS in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Cornell University. Using computational modeling and data science techniques, her research explores the interface of technology innovation and policy for improved environmental sustainability and social justice. Our first speaker of today will be Sonrisa Lucero. She is a special advisor for stakeholder engagement in the DOE Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. Sonrisa was most recently the Equitable Buildings Decarbonization Manager at RMI, where she led the efforts to integrate equity into carbon-free buildings, policy, and advocacy. Previously, she worked to advance equitable sustainability and climate policy at the City and County of Denver in the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. A lifelong activist for social justice, Sonrisa is skilled at building coalitions and guiding diverse stakeholders to equitable advance sustainability and combat climate change. She was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and graduated from Stanford University with an individually designed major in environmental systems engineering. And I'd like to welcome Sonrisa as the first seminar speaker of today's seminar. Sonrisa, can you see if you can share your slides? Thank you, Sonrisa. We can see this. Thank you.
Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, please stop me. All right, so I'm really happy to be here with all of you today and to present on community benefit plans. This is a bit of an encore presentation from a few weeks back where I just gave a very cursory introduction to this strategy that the Department of Energy has been using to integrate equity into all of our funding announcements, a lot of our financial assistance that we're giving, and a good portion of the $100 billion that DOE received through what we like to call Uncle Bill and Aunt Ira, as well as the CHIPS Act. And so this has been, I also say kind of like the Dr. Evil money, for those of you that are of my generation, where you could be like $1 million, billion, gazillion dollars. That is what DOE has received in an unprecedented way by the bipartisan infrastructure law and also the Inflation Reduction Act. So let's get into it. The first part has been the Justice 40 initiative, which has been a really pivotal, transformative order or a directive that came through one of the Executive Orders 14008 that the president signed during his first week of office, President Biden. And generally, it says that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments must flow to disadvantaged communities. And so that kind of brings up some questions for each of those buckets. What are the federal investments that are qualified? What are the benefits that we're discussing? And who are the disadvantaged communities? And so a covered program, so the federal investments that are covered is defined in two ways. One is whether it is one of the 7 topic areas there on the left that you're seeing. And because the DOE is pretty much our function, is at least the first 2 of those items and a little bit inclusive of the third, it's not surprising that 144 of our program areas are actually covered by Justice 40. It is the bulk of the money that we received under Bill and IRA. And then it also must be of the funding type of dollars that are in that second box on the right. So it has to be either grant or procurement spending. It can include, it does include financing. So we have a significant amount of money that went to our loans program office. And so it includes loans. It can be staffing costs. And so we can staff up and hire in order to support the Justice 40 initiative. And then also any kind of direct financial benefits that we might be giving. And then just kind of like your other duties as assigned in a job description, it has that as well as other directives by the Office of Management and Budget. And so now that we've covered what types of federal investments, we can define what types of benefits we are describing. And those include this list of 8 areas. The first 2 are things that we want to decrease or minimize, reduce. So energy burden, and everything here is in disadvantaged communities. So DAX in this case is disadvantaged community. So the first 2 things, we want to decrease the energy burden or the amount of which your energy bill is in proportion to your income. We want to decrease the environmental exposure and burdens of disadvantaged communities. And then the next 6 things are all about increasing things. And the first 4 of those are really about wealth transfer in a lot of ways. How do we, well, I guess 3 of the 4 are about wealth transfer, increasing access to low-cost capital, increasing energy enterprises, the minority business enterprises, diverse business enterprises in disadvantaged communities, and increasing clean energy jobs, and also the pipeline and the job training that needs to happen so people can actually access those jobs. And the one I skipped is increasing access to renewable energy overall for communities, which can also be about, of course, cost savings for communities. And then the final 2 are the ones I really love because they're so forward thinking, and that's how we can increase resiliency, especially in light of climate change, and then also how can we advance energy democracy and community ownership of different projects. So with that, that leaves us really just defining what are the disadvantaged communities, who are they, and how do we ensure that the money is flowing over to them. And I apologize if you can hear a lot of pings in my background. I'm going to try and make that stop. And so we have 2 different methods in which that is happening right now, or the one that is primary, which is the Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool that has been developed by the Council on Environmental Quality. That is the tool that we're using to define disadvantaged communities. Its final version was released last November, and as of October, which is this month, all agencies are required to move over to that tool. Previously, DOE had developed its own tool to kind of serve as an interim method of identifying communities, which I'll describe in just a moment. But right now, this tool, the CGS tool, has identified roughly 37% of the U.S. Census tracts that are Justice 40, or sometimes we call them justice communities. And really, it's about 33% of the overall population. we had developed our own tool for defining disadvantaged communities. This method used 36 different indicators across the country and also had a threshold of at least 30% of the population that had to be defined as low income. But then we also put another limiter on that, making sure that it was the top 20%, or you always hate to say the bottom 20%, but the 20% of the communities with the highest score by state. And so it is limited in that matter. And we are using our own internal DOE tool as a way to prioritize within the CGEST because we have a smaller universe of communities that are included than there is in the CGEST tool. And our tool has a bit more of emphasis on cumulative burden and also on energy indicators. So that takes us into community benefit plans. This is our main method of implementing the Justice 40 initiative here at DOE. So a lot of other program offices or a lot of other departments, other departments across the federal family received direct funding for environmental justice. The EPA has environmental justice specific funding. It has block grants. It has the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and so on. Things that can be targeted for specifically increasing equity across the country. The DOE did not receive those types of dollars. We have very specific technology by technology funding, and so in order for us to implement the Justice 40 initiative, in order for us also to make sure that we're advancing energy and environmental justice, we have created this process of the community benefit plans to try and get all of our financial assistance awardees to be able to move towards more energy and environmental justice in their projects. And so as most of you, or many of you probably know, there's two different types of funding that DOE issues. One is a formula grant one is through our formula grant programs, and these are funds that are distributed state by state and to local governments based on a formula that is set by Congress. That is not the type of funding that I will be describing for the community benefit plans. And then we have a second bucket of funding that is community grant programs, and these are competitively bid. People have to apply, or entities have to apply to receive these funds, and then based on the merit of their application, they are awarded the funding. And so that is the process in which we're discussing right now and the intervention that we have taken. And so previously there were three main areas where community groups could, or community members could have their voices heard within the project delivery. And the first part was in the actual funding. Well, I'll say this actually in the next slide, my apologies. There's three main areas in the evolution of the process. There's the request for information in the beginning, which is it's not a required part of the process, but an often used part where our program offices will ask the public at large how they can score and what goals and objectives they should be using in their different funding opportunities in order to best serve the stated goal of the project. Then in the announcement itself, we'll have the actual announcement, which is basically like a request for proposals. We call it a funding opportunity announcement. Other departments would call this a NOFO, or a notice of funding opportunity. And this is where we are asking for the applications themselves, and then enter into our review and scoring of those projects, and ultimately selection of those projects. At that point, we enter into the funding agreement, and there's a period of negotiation between the selection and the actual award, and DOE works with the applicant to be able to identify their scope, milestones, and budget. So what I was trying to say earlier is that there's only a couple of spots previously where the public could actually enter into this process. The first part of that was during the RFI, where the public could provide comments on the different types of requirements and scoring criteria that DOE would use as it measured its different applications. A couple of program offices across DOE had started a more innovative use of, or innovative strategy, which we've built on for the community benefit plans. And that was they had a requirement for diversity, equity, and inclusion into their projects. And then they would select or bring on special reviewers for the DEI, or the diversity, equity, inclusion part of the application. And those could be members of the public. So that was during the selection process. What we have done is actually build upon that. And now that we've, and have expanded on that special reviewer process, which I'll mention in a second. So after that part, there was no additional place in which a community member could participate. So what we've done is integrate this community benefit plan process into the application. And it is an element that is scored at 20% of the overall application itself. And this is a pretty significant percentage of any type of application to be weighted to that amount. It sends a signal out to all of our applicants that if they want to have a successful application, if they want to move forward, they're actually going to have to take this community benefit plan section seriously in order to ultimately receive the award. And what I was alluding to earlier is the special reviewers section. We now have been recruiting reviewers with expertise in equity and the other and the many elements of the community benefit plans, which I'm about to describe. And so that actually helps make sure that us DOEers, a lot of us have been engineers and scientists and in the lab, and maybe not doing equity as our day job. And so this gives an opportunity for those that are expert in that area to actually review those plans. And then finally, the community benefit plan becomes part of the funding agreement. And so it is a legal part of the application, and one in which the awardee has to perform and provide measurable reporting data back to the DOE, and will be evaluated at every go, no-go stop along the funding process. DOE does not award all of its funding in one tranche up front. It's going to do it in phases, and each of those phases will have a check back with the project team and an evaluation of whether or not they're meeting their expectations for each phase. And if they are failing at the CBP element, that could be a consideration for the go, no go elements of that evaluation, and they may not be awarded the next phase. Ooh. Excuse me, sorry. Wow. Hey, sorry, everybody. Test of the system. Ooh, that scared me. All right, so if you are interested in being a merit reviewer, you are able to do so. And I'll leave this slide up just for a moment. You can take a picture of your screen or put your QR code up in here, and you'll be able and follow the link, and you'll be able to sign up to be a merit reviewer. Right now, we're working on merging our systems so that we can create one common pool of merit reviewers. But right now, we have 3 separate ones based on for each of our main program offices that have a lot of the funding. So the first block there is our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Their name actually kind of defines who they are and what kind of projects they'll have. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is doing a lot of our hydrogen hubs, direct air capture, work on mine lands, transitions, and rural energy development. And then the final one there, fossil energy and carbon management. That's where we have a lot of critical minerals work, as well as the carbon management portfolio. So feel free to follow these links and sign up to be a special merit reviewer if you feel like you have expertise in some of the areas I'm about to go over. So I want to dig into, and I realize I'm probably talking a little long, so I'm going to try and go a little faster. What are the different elements of a community benefit plan? So as I mentioned, it is valued at 20% of the overall score, and it has 4 main areas: Justice 40, diversity, equity, access and inclusion, quality jobs, and then and another section on community engagement. And I'm realizing the slide is missing some words. And then each of those, as I mentioned before, has to have different milestones. And so we're requiring SMART goals, so specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-bound goals that are presented for each of those milestone moments for each of the phases of funding. And then if, as I mentioned before, if the project is selected, the CVP becomes part of the funding agreement and is required and pass it, and then everything will be evaluated at the go, no go period. So the four main elements of the community benefit plans for Justice 40, it's really describing how a project is going to meet or exceed the Justice 40 initiative, how the benefits will flow and to whom and at one time. VEIA is much more about who is the partnerships on your community or in your project team. Is it including different types of universities like MSIs, HBCUs, minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, or Hispanic serving institutions, and so on. Is it good jobs? Are you paying prevailing wage? Is it a job where the workers they're moving towards a career and not just a job? So you're giving them training over time and you're giving them a voice within their workplace, especially on safety plans. And then if you formalize any of those previous three areas within a community benefits agreement or a workforce agreement, then you would actually get extra points on your scoring for this workforce and community agreement section. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides here just to keep us moving. As I mentioned, the Justice 40 Initiative section is talking about, in order to do well in this section, you need to be able to have identified your applicable disadvantaged communities, and then where and when the anticipated benefits will flow. So making sure that you, like for example, is this a construction job and that's when it's going to happen is ahead of the project, but then there's only like, a small number of permanent jobs locally, or is it you anticipate most of the jobs to come in the operations and maintenance side, which is going to be 3 or 4 years down the road. Identifying when in time it's going to happen and also where. Then making sure that everything is, again, a SMART goal, you have trackable and measurable progress, and that it's related to the 8 DOE Justice 40 benefits that I mentioned before. I already described how and when. And then the most, I feel a very important element that we haven't yet discussed is making sure that you're anticipating any negative impacts, and especially in the context of any cumulative environmental burden that has been experienced by that community. This slide just says that there's a couple of executive orders that are supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in our work. And as I mentioned before, this is where we're making sure that we partner with the minority and diverse and women-owned business enterprises, that you're partnering with minority serving institutions, and that you're working to make sure that your workforce reflects the diversity of the United States, and helping people overcome historic barriers. There was also an executive order that is working for making sure that we have high quality jobs across the United States. And there's really 3 main areas in which we're trying to work, making sure that we're growing American jobs by making sure that we're having manufacturing and supply chains that start and continue through the United States, making sure that we're improving the quality of those energy jobs, and supporting the employers and making sure that they have strong labor standards and making sure they're not preventing collective bargaining, and then making sure that that's, again, a diverse workforce. So here, what you're scored upon is whether or not you're paying above average wages and providing benefits on both construction and operations sides of the jobs, that the workers are able to join or form a union, that, again, you're giving a pathway to a career, not just a job, and supporting pathways for advancement, and then workers have a voice in their own safety. So, and then finally, making sure, again, that you can solidify all of those elements into a formal agreement, such as a community benefit agreement or workforce agreement or good neighbor agreement. And those are all just examples of what you could do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Deborah, and let her take away some of the deeper dives. And the final note I will just say is that if you want to stay in touch with us, you can text this phone number with, I would recommend Justice 40 below, but you can also text any one of these other words and you'll get updates on that topic from us. And you can get it either through text, and you can also sign up through your email address if you include the keyword and your email. With that, Deborah, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. Shall I go ahead and share my slides? Give me 1 second.
Andrea, I think I accidentally stopped recording instead of just stopping sharing my screen.
I think it looks like it's still recording.
Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
You can see it.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just need to move ahead to my slides. Okay, so to start off with, I just want to talk a little bit about Justice 40 reporting. So now reporting requirements for all projects funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BILL. And these reporting requirements will vary based on which bill provisions is funding the work, and they include reporting on emission reductions such as criteria air pollutants, energy savings, workforce engagement, and community engagement. And to assess Justice 40, there's a strong focus on where and who. So where could be who are the sub-awardees and where are the places of work, and who is looking at using the Universal Entity Identifier and definitions of distributed disadvantaged communities. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the federal tools that are available to help geographically identify where the disadvantaged communities are located. I've also been asked to speak a bit about community benefits plans for R&D projects. And prior to coming to the Department of Energy, I had been a professor at Tufts University. And so I'm very familiar with some of the unique challenges of R&D projects. Many of the research that is done, it may be decades before there's commercial implementation of those technologies. And the technologies can also change in their application. And it could be a little uncertain at the early stages at low TRL levels to know what the applications and deployment areas would be. However, the R&D guidance for community benefit plans are quite similar to the general template. And Sonrisa has already gone over the 4 main categories in the general template. And you'll notice with the R&D guidance, 3 of the 4 are quite similar. However, it does not include the community and labor engagements. Both require DEIA, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility section, And the workforce section in the R&D guidelines is very similar to investing in job quality and a skilled workforce. And the energy equity section in the R&D guidance is similar to the Justice 40 initiative. And so there's been a lot of questions around what constitutes best practices around a community benefits plans. So I'm going to go over a few examples of some activities in each of those 3 categories that could be used in such a plan. However, I want to make sure it's very clear that this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some illustrative examples. And ultimately, you should be choosing activities that are most relevant for your particular project and proposal. So let's begin with DEIA. So some of the things that you could do is consider building collaborations and partnerships with researchers and staff at minority serving institutions. You could consider addressing barriers identified in climate surveys to remove inequities. You could consider providing anti-bias training and education in the project design and implementation teams. You could offer training, mentorship, education, and other support to students and early mid-career professionals from DACs. You could provide efforts towards improving a workforce culture of inclusion. You could develop technology and technology integration innovations to meet the needs of DACs. Those are the disadvantaged communities. You could create partnerships with local communities, especially under-resourced and DACs. You can make research products and engagement material accessible in a greater variety of formats to increase accessibility of research outputs. You could implement training or distribution of materials to reduce stigma towards individuals with disabilities. You could design technologies that strategically fit within the existing workforce for installation and maintenance of potential innovation. Another one of the categories in the CBP plans is workforce. And so there are many different things that you can do as activities to improve the workforce. You can outline the challenges and opportunities for commercializing the technology in the United States. You could create a literature review of the workforce implications of the outcome of the specific research if the innovation is successful, or a plan with dedicated budget and expertise to evaluate the potential equity implications of a successful innovation outcome. You can create a plan and milestones for assessing how a successful innovation will have implications for job savings or loss, either at the macroeconomic level or within specific industries. You can describe how the project will support workforce training to address needs for successful innovation. You'd have voluntary recognition of union or informing employees of their rights regardless of its classification. You can create a plan to evaluate how successful innovation will result in potential workforce shifts between industries or geographies. And now the Justice 40 or the energy equity section. Some of the activities that you could do there include describing how a successful innovation will support economic development in diverse geographic or demographic communities, creating a plan to engage equity and justice stakeholders in evaluating the broader impacts of the innovation or in the development of the research methodology. You could describe how the proposed research strategy and methodology was informed by input from a wide variety of stakeholders. You could create a literature review of the equity and justice implications of the outcomes of specific research if the innovation is successful, or a plan with dedicated budget and expertise to evaluate the potential equity implications of successful innovation outcomes. And like many of the other metrics, or many other proposals, they require SMART metrics. And Sonrisa has already mentioned that those are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely metrics. And some people may be a bit concerned of how to come up with equity metrics, especially for low TRL research efforts. And so for that, I encourage you to consider using the JUST-R tool that was developed by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So JUST-R stands for Justice Underpinning Science and Technology Research. It contains 30 metrics that came from literature and an additional 20 new metrics that's proposed by the authors to fill gaps in the applicability to early stage energy research. The framework axes are responsible research and innovation dimensions, and these include anticipation, reflexivity, inclusion, and adaptiveness. Another axis is the tenets of energy justice. Those include distributional, recognition, procedural, and cosmopolitan. And then the third axis is the technology readiness level. And so in the image on the right, I show for TRL level 1. So that's the lowest level. And you can see that across both of the axes, there can be many different metrics that are shown. And so these are examples of metrics that you might want to consider when you're trying to develop your SMART metrics. So throughout this presentation, we've mentioned disadvantaged communities. And some people may be wondering, well, how can you geographically define a disadvantaged community, or how are there tools to help locate where these disadvantaged communities may be? And so for that, I'd like to point you to two tools that I'll be going over in a bit of depth today. The first was developed by the White House, and so this is the White House definition of a disadvantaged community. And the associated tool is CJEST, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. That's shown on the left. And on the right is the DOE, or the Department of Energy definition. They use the Disadvantaged Community Reporter, or the DAC reporter, and that's shown on the right. So one of the first things that people notice is that the White House definition, there are many more communities that are identified as being disadvantaged. So about 36% of the total census tracts are considered disadvantaged. In comparison, the DOE DAC reporter, you'll notice that the map is much sparser, and it's only about 20% of the total US Census tracts. And as Sonrisa mentioned, the primary tool for identifying disadvantaged communities is the White House CJEST tool. However, there can be prioritization, especially based on energy initiatives that the DOE may want to prioritize disadvantaged communities based on the DOE DAC reporter. And so I provide the links to both of these here. And I think what I'd like to do, if there's time, I'd just like to demonstrate how to use some of these tools. Oops, let me see if I can switch my screen. Okay. Thank you for the patience with the screen sharing. I'm not as familiar with WebEx as I am with some of the other tools. Okay, so I hope that you're able to see. The first tool I'm going to go over is the White House tool, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. So if you go to the link that I provide, you'll come to this landing page where you can explore the map. However, before we do that, I just want to make sure you're familiar with where to get more information on the tool. So if you go over to Methodology and Data, you click on that, go to Methodology and Data, you can learn a little bit more about how the White House is defining a disadvantaged community. And they do so using these categories of burden. So you'll see categories of burden as climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. And so the way that CJEST works is if in any one of these categories, you pass a threshold to be considered disadvantaged, then you are considered disadvantaged. So you only have to be disadvantaged in one or more of these categories. So let's, because I'm coming from the Department of Energy, let's consider the energy threshold. So in order to be considered a disadvantaged community, you need to both be at and above the 65th percentile for low income. And now low income can be defined many ways, but if you click on it, it will come and it will show you how they're defining low income. It's the percent of the census tract population in households where the household income is at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, not including students enrolled in higher education. Okay. And then so you need to be that and at least one of these other two criteria. You need to be at or above the 90th percentile for either energy cost or PM 2.5 in air. Once again, you can click on it, each of those variables, and understand how is the energy cost calculated. What is it? It's the average household, and it's the average household annual energy cost in dollars divided by the average household income. And it gives you the source of where that data is coming from. Okay, and I'll leave it to you to kind of learn more about each of these criteria. So let's go back to exploring the map. So you can zoom in, zoom out. I'm just going to go ahead and enter in the location, Washington, DC. So it zooms in, and everywhere that's shown in gray is a disadvantaged community. And so if you want to know more about any of those given communities, you can just click on it, and it will appear on the right some more information. So the tract that I clicked on happened to be this tract located, and it gives the county, state, and population. You'll also see information about race and ethnicity, as well as age. And then it will tell you whether or not this census tract, it has been identified as disadvantaged, and it says yes, as is also indicated by the gray coloring. And then if you want to understand why it was classified as being disadvantaged, you can scroll down and you'll notice that so here are all of those categories of burden, and some of them are highlighted in blue. Anyone that's highlighted in blue indicates that a threshold was passed that made the community considered disadvantaged. So if I go ahead and click on health, any of these that are highlighted in blue are when you passed the threshold. And so we see, like for asthma, it had to be above the 90th percentile, and it's in the 97th percentile. So we see that that is in blue. You'll notice that energy was not highlighted. And so if you look at energy, you'll notice that although it was considered low income by being in the 89th percentile and had to be above the 65th. However, it didn't classify as being burdened by either the energy cost or the PM 2.5, and therefore it was not considered disadvantaged based on energy. So for those of you who are interested, you can also download and get the data. So if you don't want to use the interactive map, but you'd rather be able to do some analysis on the data directly, you can do so here. So next, I'm going to go ahead and move over to the DOE DAC reporter. And so when you arrive on the DOE DAC reporter, the first thing you'll notice is this very large pop-up appears. And with that, you can learn a little bit more about the tool itself. So if you click on indicator descriptions, you can download the indicators, which will be this document here. And the DOE DAC reporter has 36 indicators, and we have them grouped. So there are 5 indicators related to energy burden. So the first topic, energy burden, this is similar to the CGEST criteria about the annual average energy burden based on the annual housing costs divided by the annual household income. So that's very similar to the CGEST tool. However, we notice that there's other elements of energy burden that the DOE DAC reporter also includes, such as non-grid connected heating fuel, outage duration, outage events, and transportation costs. We also have indicators related to environmental and climate hazards, and some of these are similar to those in CGEST. Socio and economic vulnerabilities, also some of these are similar to CGEST. And lastly, we have fossil dependence, and these are not in the CGEST tool. So these include things like coal employment or fossil energy employment. And those are important communities that may be disadvantaged specifically in the energy field. Okay, so in addition to the indicator descriptions, you can also download the data directly as well as the shapefiles and get additional documentation. But this landing page, it does tell you basically the methodology that is used. And so I just want to kind of highlight some of the major differences in the methodology in the CGEST tool versus the DOE DAC reporter. So with CGEST, it is very much a thresholding tool. If you pass any particular threshold in any of those categories, you're considered disadvantaged. In comparison, the DOE DAC reporter, it looks at cumulative burden. So we have the 36 burden indicators, and for each census tract, we'll calculate the percentile values for each of the 36 indicators. Then we sum the percentiles across the indicators to create a score for each tract. Each indicator receives equal weight, and the final score for each census tract could range from 0 to 36, where 36 would represent the greatest disadvantage. So that would imply that you were in the 100th percentile for all 36 burdens. And then based on that score, we select the top 20% census tracts in each state. So one of the benefits of this is instead of simply getting an indication of whether a community is or is not disadvantaged, you actually get a numerical score, and that can be useful, especially in analysis and prioritizations. Okay, so if we go ahead and close that out. All right, and so So to use this tool, you can also just zoom in and click on a particular census tract that you're interested in. And you'll notice when you click on it, you'll get some information that shows up. You'll see the tract number, city, county, state, population, the status of whether or not it was considered disadvantaged. And then you'll also get some helpful rankings. So you'll get the national rankings. So this was in the 65th percentile nationally as disadvantaged, but within the state, it's in the 83rd% most disadvantaged. And the raw number score from the DAX score that can be between 0 and 36 was 18. And then it gives you information for each of those 36 indicators. It gives you the national percentile and the value. So for example, no access to no internet access, it has 35.92% of the population doesn't have internet access, and that would put it in the 96th percentile for most disadvantaged based on that indicator. You can also click on full report, and the reports that you get would look like this. Basically, you'll see for the tract that you look at, information on the indicator, the absolute value, and then the national percentile. Okay. Great, and so that's the short demonstration that I have of the two tools. At this point, Sonrisa and I would like to welcome questions.
Thank you so much, Deborah. This was a great presentation, and thank you so much, Sonrisa, as well. We have already several questions in the chat, so I was wondering if we can start with those. So start reading the first one. How can 40% of benefit go to disadvantaged communities for lab skill work, but then actually goes to an institution that is not in a disadvantaged community?
So I'm reading the question a little more closely because I think it's nuanced.
Yeah, it's the first one in the chat.
Okay, so one thing that I want to say is there are challenges with the 40% margin, and we need to remember that this is not 40% of the funding that is being awarded. There is no J40 budget. This is about the benefit in and of itself. And so in the way that and Deborah's team is actually working on a methodology for how we're going to do this for DOE. And so I can maybe turn it over to her. The only intro remarks I would give to that is just that we're talking about benefit, so you have to ID the benefit and who the benefit is going to. The other thing that I will say is a high-level mark of this, I'm trying not to steal any of Deborah's thunder, is to make sure, which is hard to do because she brings a lot. So, is that this is not project by project, is no required threshold on a project level. This is typically a program office goal, and so you do not have to achieve. No project has to be in a disadvantaged community. You could have 100% of the benefit go to a non-disadvantaged community. And then the hope was that the program office over the entire program will make up for that with another project that would then have maybe more of the benefit going to a disadvantaged community greater than the 40%. So then on a program-wide portfolio basis, you would actually be hitting the threshold. And then to complicate things further, DOE has many program offices, and it's very difficult to roll anything across program offices. Though you can imagine some programs like our weatherization program where almost 100% of everything is going to disadvantaged communities. And then other programs, it may be more challenging, such as an R&D type of effort or something that's in more of a feed study type of, which is just like for those that don't speak government acronyms, I can't even tell you what feed stands for. It's like feasibility and other letters and words, but it's the feasibility study that you would have at the beginning of a project that may not have benefits, flowing from it. So with that, I'll hand it up to Deborah if I missed anything, or I'm sure I missed a lot. So to enhance.
No, you did such a great job summarizing it, Sonrisa. So thank you so much. I guess just the only thing I would like to add is this is particularly profound with a lot of R&D efforts, because a lot of R&D efforts are happening at universities or national labs, and those are often not, or they may not be located in a disadvantaged community. But that doesn't mean that the research efforts that are being done are not going to ultimately benefit disadvantaged communities. So a lot of research efforts in low-cost technologies and things like that, or a lot of research in like climate readiness, especially because it is disadvantaged communities that are disproportionately bearing the weight of a lot of the climate crisis. So there is a lot of different like long-term benefits that can ultimately go to disadvantaged communities, even if the direct payment, for example, for the research isn't going to a location that is a disadvantaged community.
Thanks, Deborah. The next question I've actually heard many times before. Would it be possible to review or look at current community benefit plans for current proposed projects in our communities? So can we see what others have proposed?
Yes, right now what we have agreed to do is to be able to provide summaries of the community benefit plans publicly after award. So once the final part of the deal is inked between DOE and the selectee, or then at that point awardee, a summary version of the community benefit plan will be made public. Because of proprietary information and NDAs and a lot of other things, right now that it's a summary level, not the full disclosure of the community benefit plan. And so that's what we can do for now. I think there was also a question in there as far as like, what do I mean by extra points on the applications?
Yeah.
And that is just that roughly there's 20% of the overall value of the application that is allocated to the community benefit plan. And then each of the 4 sections have their own subcategories or their own division of those points. So you can imagine 5% really being to each of those sections. And then there is a scoring rubric for each of those sections. And so as you are meeting each of those qualifications, you're earning more points on the application review.
Thanks. Next question. How do the requirements apply to R&D projects at lower TRLs, so projects that are not at the pilot or demonstration stage? Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So I really encourage you to read the NREL paper that I mentioned that describes the Just R tool, because that really does go into different ways that you can integrate equity and justice even at very early stages of research. I mean, as low as TRL level 1. So for example, I mean, there's several different examples given in the slides of ways that you can incorporate different activities into your community benefits plan for R&D. So those were each of the bullets that I gave on those 3 slides. But for example, like for DEIA, I think you do have an opportunity to train diverse students if you're thinking about like a research project in a traditional university. So there's an opportunity to improve DEIA and also prepare trained workforce. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities. And so I'd encourage you, I'm sure we're going to be providing these slides to like go through each of those bullets and see if any of them resonate with your particular project research effort, and also to consider the Just R tool, because that really does an excellent job, gives an example within photovoltaics. And then I think that might help illuminate some possibilities.
Thank you. Next question. When partnering with a minority serving institution or underrepresented business, can those activities count towards the 40% of the benefits flowing to DACs, or are they simply activities that need to occur?
I can answer that one unless you'd like to, Deborah. And Deborah?
I'll let you take a stab at it.
All right, thank you. So it's both. So the first part is, and it's not required, I guess is maybe the way to say that. It's not required that one would work with an MSI or an underrepresented business, but you will, if you do promise that in your community benefit plan, then that will become a requirement of the funding agreement. And then it is an activity that will be required to occur in order to continue to receive funding. The second part of that is because we have, among our 8 benefits, we have working in the support and the advancement of minority-owned businesses. That activity can also count as a benefit that can be rolled up in your 40% flow. So it's both. It can be both.
Great, thanks. Next question. Do you have nationwide data by census tract?
And that's for power outages, right? I think that's what.
Correct. Yeah.
I'll give it
Yeah,
one to the doctor.
I'm happy to take that one. So the short answer is no. So the outage data is at a higher resolution than that, and then it's kind of distributed for the purpose of the DOE DAC reporter. It's distributed in all census tracts within, I believe it's either the I think it's a county level that we do have data. So it's not at the census tract. However, I think this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about a White House initiative called ODIN. And that they're trying to partner, it's voluntary, but it's a partnership between utilities where they basically offer to provide more transparent outage data. And it's a growing initiative. And I'm currently running a 10-week long university hackathon with the US Census Top Sprint, where we're using data from this White House initiative. And the idea behind it is that the data will become, well, the data is publicly available, and as more utilities participate, then we'll have higher resolution data on outages so that we can more carefully target and illuminate the injustices that exist in outage durations. Great question.
Thanks, Deborah. Next question. Are proposals likely to get better scores if they engage communities in both databases that you discussed?
So I think a lot with the community benefits plan, there's a bunch of different ways that you can demonstrate community benefits. And I think one of them is by serving disadvantaged communities. So I think partnership with them is encouraged, but it's not required, because you can have benefits flow to them even if it's not a direct partnership. And when it comes to the two databases, I will say that most federal agencies now have their own definition of a disadvantaged community. So the overarching one to use is the White House one. That's like the official disadvantaged community. But then recognize that depending on which grants you're applying to, different federal agencies are going to have different priorities. So like the Department of Transportation, they'll have many more indicators related to transport, like transit. And the DOE, we have many more related to energy. And especially if your proposal is to improve the situation for one of those DOE indicators, I think it's a useful tool to help identify communities that would be project specific, and you could help their disadvantage in a specific way that's relevant for the office that you're applying to.
Thanks,
In the
Deborah.
interest of time, I've read ahead to the next two questions in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and answer them both together.
Thank you.
If that's okay. So the first point is well taken, Ms. Eaton. We are working to get more elements of the community benefit plans to be public in their full language and not just the summary level. One thing that the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations has been doing, though, is been for the DAC hubs, for the Director of Capture hubs, has been to begin community engagement meetings with the project selectee directly. And so while we at DOE may not be able to publish everything publicly, the project selectee can do that themselves at their own discretion. And so the first thing that we're doing is trying to introduce the project team directly to the community so that they can begin having those conversations. And the project team can answer directly to the community members for their concerns. And then we will definitely share the slides. And then for the community benefit plan, the opposition side, that part's a little more challenging. We do not have a section right now that scores opposition, and we do not require community consent in order for a project to go within a location. But we do value anytime there is support for a project. And so if a project can demonstrate that they have support, they're going to have a higher score. If they cannot demonstrate that they have support, then they will not be able to score higher in that area. I realize that doesn't account for opposition. The other thing I would say is that the special merit reviewer section is a way to bring in equity-focused reviewers into the project who can help identify not just that can maybe help sniff out from the application where a project team may not be fully engaged with the community, because community engagement is a big part of the evaluation. And also DOE has been doing a ton of engagement locally to try and understand the dynamics on the ground ahead of time, so that that is a part of the evaluation before we select a project.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Sonrisa. We really appreciate you visiting with us today and this wonderful information and seminar. So the seminar will be available on the iWest webpage within the next few days. Thanks so much. So we'll have another speaker in 2 weeks. It's going to be Dr. Ro Chaudhary from Navajo Technical University, and he will be talking on restoring water resources to the Navajo Nation. So we'll hope to see you back then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.